Hey everybody, this is Nathan Donnelly with Northwest Resilience, and today I wanted to do a video that's a little bit more lighthearted. Things have been kind of heavy lately all over the world with the coronavirus, and I've been trying to do a lot of videos around gardening and bug out bags and risks and all that stuff to try and make things better for folks as best I can from where I am. But today I wanted to do a video on something I just love to talk about, a lot of people love, and that's knives. I really love knives, and a few years ago I got into making knives around the time that I was trying to get on the Alone show, and I kind of got it into my head that I wanted to build the best knife, the knife for the Alone show before I ever thought I'd get on it. And so I did that. I made two of them actually. I had two designs that were both a little bit experimental, and I wanted to try out the differences between the two. So I built them both, and very happy with both of them actually. And I wanted to share with you where kind of the process I went with that, and show you the knife that I used on the show, because I'm proud of it. It really performed very, very well for me out there. I have no complaints with the knife that I made. So with no further ado, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Alone show, it's a TV show on the History Channel that I was on season 6 of. Where we get dropped off, 10 of us get dropped off into 10 different places deep in the wilderness with only 10 items, and we have to survive based on those tools and pieces of gear we brought out there for as long as possible, and the winner gets $500,000. So we didn't get to bring rifles or tents or anything like that. It was all pretty low-tech equipment that we were allowed. So one of my 10 items, two of my 10 items I should say, were knives. And I'm going to go into also this little guy here. This is the old-timer Splinter carving knife that is one of my 10 choices that I brought, and I'll go into that a little bit later and do an actual separate review video for that knife, because it's for a $25 knife, man, I have no complaints for it. It really performed well for me. So first off, my criteria for what makes a good Alone / survival knife. First of all, a good survival knife has got to be heavy duty. It cannot fail you. It's got to be. Hey Abby, how you doing? How you doing, huh? This is Abby. How you doing? She's my pup. She's looking for stuff to do. She's bored. All the humans are at home to play with. Good girl. So it's got to be heavy duty. It's just got to work no matter what. Heavy duty does not mean a crowbar though, and there are a lot of survival knives now that are a crowbar with a sharp edge on them, and that's totally unnecessary. The ideal survival knife is not too big or too small. Too big is getting into territory where you're probably not going to have it with you in a survival situation because you didn't bother to put it on your belt. You're sick of carrying it or whatever. So if it's a giant knife, I'm an everyday carry belt knife guy. So I always have a knife. Today I've been wearing this one right here on my belt, and that way, regardless of what happens, if I go down in a motorcycle accident or I'm on a backpacking trip or whatever, on my person I have the single most important piece of single most important tool that I can carry on me. That's a guarantee. So not too big, not too small. Full tang construction. This is a good X-ray of a full tang construction knife. This is the knife I took on Alone. And a little spoiler alert, there was a small fire involved, and this knife did not make it out of the fire. So the tang is the actual steel of the blade itself, and a full tang knife will go all the way down the full length of the handle. This is a very beefy full tang, 1/8 inch thick steel. This is overkill. I honestly, I don't have any problems with the tangs that Mora uses in their knives. I think if you're figuring out a way to break those, then you're probably, I think that's overkill. People who do torture tests on knives and think that you need something that beefy, or else is just a load of crap. Just use your tool as you normally would use it, and you'll be fine. I baton the hell out of rat tail tang knives, which are much thinner, and I've never ever had a problem with them in decades of using them that way. So I like to use, if it's going to be a carbon steel knife, I like to use 01 tool steel. 1095 is very, very close, so that's the 101 is 1% carbon, and the 1095 is 0.95% carbon, so they're 5% carbon off from each other. The carbon is what forms a crystalline structure inside of the steel and gives it its tenacity, its strength, and its hardness. And some knives will only have like 1070 steel in them, and I find that to be too soft. It takes an edge well, but it doesn't keep it very well. And 01 1095, the carbon steel that Mora uses in their carbon knives, that's an equivalent of 01 tool steel, has always worked really wonderfully for me. And it's also very forgiving if you're wanting to be a knife maker at home. That's a great steel to work with, because the tempering and all that stuff it's not as fussy as some other steels can be. So I'm a big fan of that. Carbon steel as well. If you were to take a carbon steel knife and strike a sharp rock off of the back of it, you can get faint sparks to come off that, if you have the right tender to catch those sparks, you can light a fire with just your knife and a rock. So that's a valuable thing to have as well. And then last but certainly not least is I like to have a Scandinavian bevel on my knives. Now, Scandi, as it's also called, typically called, is where you have a bar of steel. This is a stock removal knife. Both of these knives, I just had a bar of steel that I ground away. Steel where I didn't want it to be to make the knife, right? So a Scandinavian grind knife has got just a single bevel behind, coming off of, let's see if we can get the camera to focus on that. Come on, camera. Well, at any rate, there's two planes that are coming up together there, and there's no secondary bevel. Like this other knife here that I have, this is more of a 3/4 grind, if I remember correctly. No, this is almost a full flat grind knife. You can see that this knife tapers nearly all the way from the spine down. So there's one big bevel all the way to the edge, and then there's a much finer bevel on the edge there that you can kind of see the light catching on there. That's only, a 1/16 of an inch in total, whereas this one here is more like 3/8 of an inch bevel. And they're roughly, this is actually a thicker blade in this knife here. But it has a much finer bevel. Well, I'll get into that a little bit more. That's not exactly true. I like Scandi bevels because Scandinavian, well, first of all, it's called Scandinavian because it comes from Scandinavia, where there is a very rich history of bushcrafting and survival skills. Very, very rich. And also knife making. So what I like most about a Scandinavian grind is that bevel is something that you can use the blade slides along the wood on that bevel, and it gives you something that you can register, that you can feel with your hand, to feel how much bite you're getting into the wood. And it facilitates carving and it facilitates all woodwork with a knife just so much better than, say, this Ontario Knife Company. This is the TAC Mod Limited Edition. This works. You can definitely do. Can you see how I'm not really catching that very well? This is a knife I bought specifically to potentially have been on another homesteading TV show in Alaska that never got made, but I got this knife to butcher moose with. And for meat production, if you are primarily concerned with butchering animals, then a full flat grind or something like it might be the ticket. The secondary bevel on this is steeper than the primary bevel on the Scandi grind. Because of that, Scandi grinds have a little bit of a reputation for being having a less durable edge than something more like a full flat with a secondary bevel on it. That's kind of unfortunate. I don't think that's an earned reputation. The very, very finest edge, yes, it doesn't hold as well, but if you're sharpening your knives as often as you should, it's no big deal to put that edge back. Overall, the edge is actually quite a bit stronger because it's not as fine as this thing right here is to that point. You know, it's finer than that knife is all the way back practically to the spine. So there's less steel in this, what looks like a bigger blade, than in this one, this smaller blade. This has more steel in it. It's more strong. Another benefit of a Scandi grind knife is that it's got its own sharpening gauge built into it. That plane of the bevel is what you will actually set the knife on a sharpening stone and use to guide your knife sharpening. So if you're a beginner with knives, particularly, you're gonna like a Scandi knife quite a bit more because it's gonna actually teach you how to sharpen your knife. It'll guide you as you're using it if you're doing it properly. So I'm just a big fan of Scandi all around. I talked about this one maybe being a little bit better for meat processing. That's because this more blunt secondary bevel, if it comes into contact with bone, is not going to dull as quickly or as easily as the Scandi will, okay? But if you're good with a knife, you're not going to be chopping into bone all that much, and I've never had an issue with that. I've butchered deer, rabbits, fish, all kinds of stuff with almost exclusively Scandi knives, and I've never had that issue. This knife here, which still looks practically brand new, should be all kinds of beat up for how much I use knives, because it's 2 or 3 years old now, and it's at least 3 years old, I'd say, and it's still practically brand new because I almost never use it. It's just not the tool for the job for me most of the time. This knife I haven't used a whole lot because it's my survival knife that lives on my motorcycle, and which I should do a video about as well. This knife here is the one that I brought on alone, and I used it every day, 100 times a day, and it performed flawlessly. So I'll go into a little of that more too. Both of these knives that I designed have a few properties to them that I designed into them, okay? One, their thickness. This one is an 1/8 inch thick, and this one is 5/32 thick. This is one of the reasons I made 2 knives instead of 1. I didn't know if 1/8 inch was going to feel thick enough or not. It absolutely is. You do not need a knife that's thicker than 1/8 inch thick, okay? This is 5/32. It started to feel a little bit chunky at that size. I have batoned the ever-living crap out of this knife here, and there's just not enough strength in my arm to break an 1/8 inch thick piece of 01 tool steel. It's not going to happen. You don't need to worry about it. Don't think you need to get a crowbar for a survival knife. 1/8 inch is the equivalent of 3 millimeters if you're in metric world, and I would go as fine as 2.5 millimeters if you are going to be building your own knife. My Mora, the Mora Companion HD, for example, is 2.5 millimeters, and that's perfectly adequate, and that's a smaller blade than this is, and I batoned the Jesus out of that thing as well. So don't think you need to be getting a big chunk of steel in order to have a survival knife. Again, you're not going to carry it as often, and it's going to be less utilitarian for what you're primarily going to be using the knife for, which is wood carving. Even if you have to butcher a moose, that smaller knife will work just fine. Jordan Jonas butchered an entire moose with a Leatherman on alone, so it can be done. The other thing that I have done with all my knives is if you were to draw a perfectly straight line right up the dead center of the handle and continue it out beyond the tip of the knife lies right on that center line. That is another thing that allows the feel of the knife to register in my hand when I'm doing something like carving a bow drill socket or using the point of the knife. It is on the pivot point that runs through the whole tool right into the center of my hand. So both of these knives, even though they're different shape, have that going to them. The center line comes right out of the tip of the knife here. I just find that that's been really useful. I hand drew both of these knife designs on paper and then transferred them onto the steel that I used. And I wanted to show you how exactly the same they ended up being on the sweep of the blade. Can you see how that knife is right behind it there? I did not copy these off of each other, but they are exact. I just happen to do it that way. That's the sweep that I like in my bones for a knife, and both of them have been wonderful carvers and bushcrafting knives, and that shape there, I really was happy with it. So it's just that sweep. I don't know. Mora's kind of start off straight and then they do more of a curve towards the end. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's fine, but I prefer more of a gradual sweep than that. And so that's a knife feature. I also used, can you see those two strips of green on either side of the tang there? That is vulcanized paper. Those are called scale liners. They're more of they're almost an aesthetic touch as much as anything. I liked the color green to be in there, but they also are a barrier between the wood of the scales, which is the handle parts, and the carbon steel of the knife. And I wanted to have a little bit of a barrier there so that I wasn't getting any rusting happening inside the handle. The glue should provide a good good barrier for that, but just in case, that vulcanized vulcanized paper does a really good job of that. And then you can see that I used wooden, you see these two pegs that I've got it. What am I trying to use there? What word am I trying to use? At any rate, the scales are held on. In addition to really strong epoxy, they have hickory pegs put in them to hold the whole thing together. And that really, I've never heard of anybody using any kind of wood, let alone hickory, for that. And it worked very well on my other knife. And then lastly, you'll see I have a bow drill socket right there in the middle of my handle. Bow drill socket can be, if you're making a bow drill kit, one of the hardest parts of the whole kit to find in nature, because it's got to have a few pretty specific criteria. You want this small little divot in a socket that is hard. The spindle isn't going to eat into it too much. It's lubricated or it's smooth, all those things, and it's kind of hard to find that in nature sometimes. So if you always have one on your knife or your belt buckle or something like that, then then it can save you 20 minutes of looking around in the woods while you're trying to build a fire. And yeah, I wonder if there's anything I'm missing about that. I think that's about it as far as the specific, except for the most important part. Both of these knives have got kind of a unique spine shape to them, that contour along there. They're different from each other. This is the other reason I made two knives. I wanted to try this out. This is kind of a little invention of mine, where this sine wave shaped spine here, I did that for two reasons, both of which worked very well. If you've batoned much wood, say you've got a spear point knife, which is this part of the swale isn't cut out of it, it's kind of rounded over like that. If you're batoning a log and only that much of the tip of your blade is sticking out and it's rounded over, when you're hitting it with a stick, bang, 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 your stick is constantly hitting that and glancing off, and it's really not getting much purchase. So I wanted to have a nice little flat spot that I could slam onto the back of with a stick and make sure I was transferring all the force of my baton, which could break at any minute, into the wood that I'm trying to cut. Batoning is another reason that I like Scandi blades too, because it's a wedge. It's a fairly pronounced wedge, so it's made for splitting. The other knife that I have here, it's also wedged, of course, but it's very fine. So this knife might bury a full inch into the wood before that wedge is as thick as it is here at only 3/8 of an inch. So again, beautiful, wonderful knife. Just doesn't deal with wood, as well as Scandi does. So the second reason that I did this swale thing here is for scaling fish. Okay, so that kind of has that concave shape to it. So it works really well for going over the body of a fish and pulling scales off. It worked very, very well, actually. I'm really happy with how that worked out. And then since it's a sine wave, I still have the full length of this to work as a scraper. The 90-degree spine on the back of a knife isn't just important for using for a ferro rod, for striking a ferro rod, but I do all kinds of woodwork, or you can scrape fat wood with that and get very fine shavings of fat wood that'll take a spark off of a ferro rod as well. You can scrape with the sharp side of your knife, but you're dulling your knife, and that's a resource that you want to protect. So 90-degree spine on both of these knives, and it worked out very, very well. Yeah, so that's kind of a Donnelly special, that sine wave spine that I thought of, experimented with, and I've been very, very happy with it. I still, at the very end though, I did kind of this sheep's foot point that keeps the point nice and durable. If it continued on, it would go past that center line for one, but it would also make that tip even finer. And in, I don't know, 30 plus years of using knives daily, the only time I've ever broken a knife, it's been the very tip has broken. So that's as strong as a spear point tip, but without all the extra bulk out here. And yeah, that's about all I have to say about the knives that I took on a loan. This one here, I want you guys to put in the comments. I've been thinking about keeping it as it is. It looks pretty rugged. It went through the fire, and I've been thinking, can you see how it's got slight bend to it there too? It arced a little bit in the fire. I'm struggling with whether or not to turn this back into a knife, put scales on it, have my buddy Charlie retemper it for me, or keep it as a memento the way it is. So put in the comments whether or not you think I should rebuild the knife, the Phoenix knife, out of the fire, or whether I should keep it as it is as kind of a reminder of what happened up there. One thing that I would do, after talking all that time about the back edge here, this has got more of a clip point edge to it right here with that bump right there. I think on this knife I'm gonna take that off and just make it smooth, make it flat all the way across. Because it's already finer right there, I already have a good flat surface and I don't need to have that sine wave. But that's the only improvement I would make, or change I should say, I would make to this knife, and it's purely aesthetic. There's really no functional reason to do it other than I think it would look better. So I started learning how to make knives probably 7 or 8 years ago. I started out by buying some assembly kits of knives that already had a good edge and all that, and I'd basically receive like this and a couple of scales and some scale liners and some pegs and some glue, and then I would build a good knife. I did some of those, and then I started making my own out of steel using stock removal with a belt grinder, and I've probably made 3 or 4 knives that way now, and really feel like I pretty much came to perfection with these two here. I learned how to make knives primarily from watching YouTube videos, just like you guys are right now, and I wanted to recommend Jack Lore Knives. He's a gentleman out of England. If you've looked at knife making at all before, you've probably already seen him, but he has got the just most in-depth step-by-step knife making videos that I just absorbed every one of them that he made, and I watched dozens of other knife making videos as well. And Jack with Jack Lore Knives, the guy is just sweet as can be, super humble man, really cares about making knives, makes works of art knives. And I just wanted to throw that out there, that if you're looking for good tutorials on knife making, his knife, you know, I didn't make as fancy a knives as he does. I don't need him to be that fancy because I'm going to beat the crap out of him. But every skill, you know, that I used to make this knife, I got from him, more or less. So I just didn't do some steps where he took the extra energy to make a mirror polished side to his blade. I didn't want to have that. So you can get a lot out of it. He goes into tempering, he goes into you name it, all of the steps. He spends like days making one of these knives, working full time, and I'm just throwing it out there for his channel. He's a good guy, and so put it in the description, in the comments, if you think I should remake this knife. Maybe I'll do a show for that, any other questions you have about knife making or any of the thought processes I go through, I will probably do other knife videos aside from the 2 I made for Alone, just because I do like them a lot. I'm no means a professional knife maker, but I am a professional knife user, and those are the type of people you want designing blades, is the ones who use them. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you all are getting through this period in our lives relatively well, and enjoying extra family time and free time and feeling as well rested as I am. And hit like, subscribe, share, all those things if you like my videos, and check on some of my previous videos if you're wanting to get some information on how you can be better prepared for any kind of disaster, but in particular the one we're in right now. And I am also doing call-in, I'm doing over-the-phone disaster preparedness consultations, and permaculture and survival consultations. So put something in the description, or in the comments, if you would like to get in contact with me. I am cutting my rates in half during this whole pandemic episode, because it's just important that we're all teaching each other and we're being a community and helping each other out. So my rates are half of what they normally would be until, for the foreseeable future. So love you all. You guys have a good one and be useful. Nathan Donnelly with Northwest Resilience, out.